This is not how I intended to retire from the force. Do you know that feeling? When you did everything right except for the very last thing, and then it leaves that indelible stain on something that could have been impeccable. This is exactly how I feel, even after all these years. But if there is a greater sentiment in my heart, then it is certainly my gratitude for being alive to tell you this story. Sylvie is the name, or Sylv like my former colleagues still call me to this day. I have been in the police from 1985 to 2008. Went from dispatch officer to detective in 1991 and remained one until my forced retirement. I was never interested in climbing up the ranks. Instead, I wanted to be where I could bring the maximum value. I believed it to be investigations and was recognized for being good at solving missing persons cases. After 21 years of service, I started to feel a little old and rusty and wanted to shift my attention on another passion of mine, baking. I think I should have listened to that feeling. Why did not I listen? Because every time I was very close to do so, there was a case that needed to be solved and I could not just let it go. I had to help the persons and the families involved. The Firefly cases then started in 2007, a string of disappearances so puzzling, inexplicable and frustrating that I started experiencing hair loss the more I investigated. It was always the same modus operandi. A child is out for whatever reason, at least most of the time, sees a light, apparently a firefly, follows it to a very quiet area with no prying eyes and just vanishes. Whoever sick psycho that was doing it had to be aware of the cameras all throughout the city, because the vanishing part always occurred in a dead angle that the device could not cover. Be it for taunting or another reason, there was always one item belonging to the victim left on the scene. If only we could get all the right answers. The first case brought to our table was that of little Marjorie. The 8-year-old girl was last seen walking home from school since the two locations were less than 800 meters apart. On a camera mounted to a street pole, something resembling a firefly can be seen emerging from a small bush, gain the attention of the little girl by flying around and way above her in circles and then lead her to an adjacent, quieter alley with no cameras. The only thing she left behind was her right shoe. Another case, not the second, was that of little Spencer, out with his parents at a restaurant. We do not know how or when he noticed the firefly, but at some point, the 11-year-old can be seen following it to the toilets of the establishment, and he was never found to this day. He left his baseball cap behind. The most frightening case was that of little Harrison. No child is safe anywhere anymore. The 8-year-old boy lived with his parents in their CCTV-monitored house in an upscale neighborhood. The firefly can be seen gaining the attention of the boy late at night and through his window by bumping into it. The boy then pushed the curtain aside, curious about the noise, then opened the window, curious about the light, and let it in. He was never seen again, and left only one button of his pajamas behind. The more we approached 2008, the more the responsibles struggled to contain themselves and the cases became terrifyingly frequent. We started a whole campaign advising parents and kids themselves as well to avoid following fireflies or anything that resembles a little light. We also had officers constantly patrolling areas to ensure maximum safety. It worked with the parents as they became stricter, but not really with the children as the disappearances continued. The most disturbing and mind-bending case came afterwards. 3 kids were last seen playing in a park near their neighboring houses. On one of the cameras in the park, for the first time, we could see the arrival of the light on the scene. Its flight was very precise and intentional, like a small drone. It was not flashing or flickering, and it entered one of the attraction for children that was a fairy little house. It stayed there until the children were close enough, then revealed itself, flying and flashing like a firefly. You could see the kids struggling in their minds about making the right decision, but I guess the promise of a magical adventure is far too tempting for our little ones. Probably placing their confidence in their number, the 3 children followed the little light in the house. It had little windows that allowed us investigators to have a glimpse of what occurred inside. The light seemingly grew brighter after a few seconds, and my heart sank when I saw the house shaking as if they put an actual fight for their lives when they realized that it was a trap. Then everything stopped. That was it. 3 kids at once. 6-year-old Betty, 7-year-old Maria and 9-year-old Jennifer, leaving behind a bracelet, an earring and a butterfly-shaped hairpin, respectively. Rage and uproar overcame the town. We had vigilante groups forming and people accusing others of being the culprits, and being involved in human trafficking and terrorism. We had countless calls pouring in every single day that of course did not lead anywhere. I was put under more pressure than anyone else in the service because of the record that I had for solving missing persons cases, and it seemed that the entire burden of the Firefly mystery rested on my shoulders. Several theories involving the supernatural emerged, but I was not one to entertain such crap. It had to be one or several persons using some very elaborate things. We just had to bring all the right pieces together. So of course, I did some digging and learned that the same thing was happening in a few other towns as well, but the cases were seemingly swept under the carpet to avoid a rather justified national hysteria. Children were disappearing. I always told myself that as a woman, a mother and a human being, I was ready to shine maximum light on those cases to raise awareness. I tried contacting the colleagues who worked on the cases in other towns but received puzzling responses from them. Honestly, it was as if they did not care or they were instructed not to say much. Enraged by their reactions to the cases, I investigated them, convinced that they all could be involved and that they could lead me to answers. I discovered something. Most if not all of those colleagues were approached by shady people who somehow managed to dissuade them from pursuing investigations and just put everything on hush. Meanwhile, the bastards grew more confident, taking children away, and if it was not happening in our town, it was happening elsewhere. My husband Albert and I grew so paranoid that we put bars on every window and door, and they were usually closed at all times, just to protect our two boys. We were scared of all kinds of lights, especially if it was small and very bright. Soon enough, the shady people approached my colleagues and I, me in particular, each of us in our own respective homes. No, they were not dressed in black suites with sunglasses and all that, but I could still read government written all over them. My husband told it to me later, but while two of them were trying to coerce me to let them contain the threat, as they called it themselves, a third agent was standing behind the two others, arms crossed, staring at him, with one of her fingers twitching. It was a secret message in Morse code. Being a former Boy Scout, getting the message was a piece of cake for my husband, though it was very unclear at first. Watch till you six it. Until I see what? And watch out for what exactly? My husband thought. Was he supposed to pick up anything subtle while they were in our house? Everything started to become too dangerous and Albert was even thinking about relocating in another continent just to be on the safe side. Literal threats in our home? Government involvement? Psychos abducting kids and watch till you see it? Should we just keep an eye open on the cases until we see something? So many questions, so many stress, my health and our life quality were declining. One day, I decided to watch one of the surveillance tapes and this is when it hit me. The message was for me and all the other investigators, at least, those who decided to ignore the threats. Honestly, what was there to watch other than the tapes? So I rewatched them, again and again without finding a single clue. I did not let the frustration get to me. Maybe the agent meant watching entire tapes instead of the shorter versions we got from the investigations, which could be several days long depending on the capacity of the surveillance equipment used. I decided to give it a shot. Most of the recordings were erased by the different maintenance crews because they considered that we already got what we needed. However, miracles happen, and for the cases I mentioned earlier, the full tapes if I can call them as such were still available. It took time, it took long, but we discovered something. Something even stranger. On the scene of each disappearance, after many hours and even days in some cases, an animal would emerge, without it first arriving there prior to the events. The same way it did not make sense for those kids to disappear at those places, it did not make sense for those animals to appear there. In the case of little Marjorie, a rabbit was seen emerging from the alley hours later at night and leaving the scene. For little Spencer, they kept the recordings because something extraordinary happened, but they never thought it could be useful for the investigation so they never brought it up. A snake, a freaking snake could be seen emerging from the restroom area after about 2 days and during the night when the restaurant is closed and just disappear out of view at a dead angle. The employee said that they never encountered it in the facility or even outside, but they cannot really tell how it got in or out. For little Harrison, as his distraught mother kept hope, leaving the door and the windows of his room open day in and day out, a light could be seen from a window after a few days, glowing out of the blue at 1:46 a.m. and for about 4 seconds. Afterwards, a black bird, probably a raven, just flew out from the same window. She never brought it up to us. In fact, she never checked, never knew and just kept waiting. She still is. For little Betty, Maria and Jennifer, a husky dog emerged from the fairy house after a strange light shone inside, hours after the girls had vanished. I still remember its piercing eyes as it looked directly at the camera. It felt like looking into my soul. It was disturbing. The colleagues started again with the supernatural crap, with the outlandish theory that the light was turning the children into animals. Give me a break, come on. Are you kidding me? It was rather quickly debunked because in the case of the 3 little girls, Betty, Maria and Jennifer, only one animal emerged, one instead of 3. It hurt me to think that, but I wanted to be on the scene of the next one. I knew it meant one more child disappearing, but I had to investigate and find some much needed answers. It happened on November the 23rd, 2008. This is certainly the day I knew that it was it for me. I had to retire and let it go somehow. I am still very ashamed, but I had to. A distressed father called the emergency number in absolute panic, saying that a thing was trying to take his daughter from him and both were hiding somewhere in an abandoned factory. By the time we got there, it was too late. Apparently, both of them were living there because the father was paid to guard the premises. We found him with the entire left side of his torso bitten off and missing. The coroner said he could not believe his eyes because the bite marks resembled that of an animal that is no longer around in our era, and saying its name would label him as crazy and send him to an asylum and an early retirement. We traced the little footsteps of Heather, the 7-year-old little girl, through the snow and to the back of the factory where they abruptly stopped. The government guys also showed up, taking charge immediately before the arrival of the press, and reinforcing my will to uncover the truth. They threatened and almost chased everyone away at some point, but the most revolting thing according to me was that for people claiming to have the intention of containing the threat, they did not do much. I strongly believe that they knew about the animals appearing after the disappearances, yet, they only set up a few strange devices all around the place and just left. I was not going to miss them anyway. Whatever trick or technology that was helping the culprits abduct those kids, I was going to discover it. What if it was actually the work of those government guys? I thought at some point. After all, for people with considerable means, they did not seem to try hard enough to put an end to the nightmare. Therefore, I was going to do just that. I tried to convince my colleagues to go back on the scene and wait, as we initially planned, but the government people suddenly became a big enough reason for them to change their minds. I went back alone. I parked my car at an angle where I could have full view of the back of the factory and waited. I waited long hours, from 1 p.m. to 10 p.m., fighting hunger, tiredness and sleep, just waiting to see what would emerge. I hoped that the government guys' strange devices would not jeopardize my plans somehow, and was finally rewarded at exactly 10:17 p.m. A faint, yellow light glowed all of a sudden near the back entrance and behind a box for no more than 5 seconds. I wanted to inspect it at close range, so I got out of my car and as a result could not see when the light stopped. One of the government people devices located nearby started acting strangely, emitting loud beeping sounds, and I did not want it to spoil everything, so I kicking it down to turn it off and damaged it. I carefully approached the area, occasionally looking around just in case, and as expected, right where the light shone just moments ago, I saw the blackest cat I have ever seen and will ever see in my life sitting there, with its back on me. I froze, watching its peculiar behavior. It was stretching, but not like the animal it was, rather like the way humans roll their heads around to make their necks crack. As soon as it sensed me, it also froze and slowly turned its head to look at me standing there, a few meters away, revealing its glowing eyes. That cat did not have a shred of fear of me. Still looking at me, it then slowly turned its entire body to face me, then standing on all fours, before making its way towards a broken window. I know it may sound ridiculous, but its behavior seemed to speak to me, in a rather confident and condescending way, such as, "Looks like you've finally found me. Well, I accept the challenge. Let's settle this now. Follow me." That was how I felt it. That was how it looked like to me. The cat leaped and landed on the window frame, looked back at me one last time, before going inside the factory. The moment it disappeared behind the wall, the yellow light appeared inside for about 2 seconds, then vanished, confirming that the animal was indeed its source. I gathered the immense courage to follow that cat into the dark and the unknown of the abandoned factory, using the same window, and landed on a machine, then on the floor. Flashlight and gun out, I braced myself and started advancing, ready to confront the culprits, and put an end to the nightmare. Countless machines that I did not really recognize revealed themselves under the flashlight, placed in rows, and most of them covered with old, discolored and dusty sheets. My heartbeat quickening, I scanned the surroundings carefully until I spotted something out of the ordinary. Seated on one of the machines and watching me was a spider. A large spider so massive that it seemed to have difficulties to move fast enough as it hid behind the covered machine. I kept calm and courage after gasping and still advanced carefully. A yellow light shone from behind the machine, shortly just like before, then vanished. I gasped again and almost spoke to it when a husky dog, just like in the video footage involving the 3 little girls, Betty, Maria and Jennifer, emerged from behind the machine. It had the same behavior and confidence as the cat, staring at my soul as it sauntered towards the next machine and disappeared behind it. The yellow light shortly returned again, and on the other side, a deer emerged, still staring at me, walking towards the next machine. It repeated the process, hiding behind the machine, yellow light for a short time, until a new animal emerged from the other side. That time, it was the snake from the Spencer video footage. The reptile hid behind another machine and the yellow light shortly appeared again, but this time, the animal remained hidden, waiting for me to uncover it. By that time, I was shaking uncontrollably, dominated by fear. I considered running away while I still could because I had no idea what was going on and what I was up against. But the children, I had to do it for the children and their families. Trembling, I made my way towards the machine, breathing so heavily that I knew the animal could hear me and sense every bit of my fear. I put the flashlight between my teeth to free my left hand and extended it to remove the sheet. The moment I pulled it off the machine, a bird escaped from behind it and flew past me, right above my head. I could not help but scream this time. I then picked up the flashlight and tried to keep the bird under the light, but it was very fast and made its way through an open entrance, turning right and disappearing in a corridor. Once again, yellow light shortly, followed by massive stomping sounds, and through the entrance, I saw an elephant running from the right to the left. I was shocked, paralyzed and afraid. Once more, yellow light shortly, and for the first time, the animal made a sound with its mouth. It was a roar, announcing its terrifying new form as one of those big cats, a lion or a tiger maybe, or perhaps, something much worse. I could not continue. I dashed towards the window, hoping that whatever that was would not give chase, and climbed on the machine next to the opening. I looked back at the corridor entrance and saw nothing but an eye shining in the dark, staring at me. It was big enough for me to see that it was a left eye, precisely a left yellow pupil. I still remember the exact and only word that escaped from my mouth. Why? I know it does not make any sense, but I want you to picture this. When you see that somebody despises you, you can see it on their face. The frowning, the death stare, the way the lips curve downward. A group of elements forming the face that serves to reflect the sentiment of that person towards you. Now, imagine hatred, disgust and evil intent all conveyed through only an eye, one single eye. This is why I ask myself why? Why do you hate me so much? Why do you want to rip me apart? What history do we have that led to such extremes? The monster did not move. Fortunately, I did not intend to clearly see what form it took this time as I hurt my ankle, storming through the window to escape it. Still on the ground, using my gun covered with some snow, I turned around and aimed at the window because I expected the animal to appear at the frame. It did not. I then stood up and limped to my car, only to see the black cat standing on the roof of the vehicle, waiting for me, staring at me with the same glowing yellow left eye, the same yellow pupil, its extreme hatred multiplied by the visibility of its entire head. I abandoned the vehicle. Gun in hand, I limped for hours, constantly looking around me to see if the animal was pursuing me, bewildering the occasional motorists who saw me fleeing. Never in my life have I been so afraid, and to this day, nothing and nobody ever scared me in the way that thing did. Whatever it is. However, this is only the part I remember. Some colleagues told me that I was found under a bridge, acting erratically, repeating to myself how much of a piece of shit I was and that the sunset was close, whatever it meant. I retired a few days later. Who could believe that I would one day tell stories of the supernatural? The only thing I can say is that certain things out there are beyond any form of explanations. I failed to solve the cases and retired. The agents came to our house again to threaten us in a much more convincing way, and this time, we listened to them. At least, they have been kind enough not to ask me to pay for the device I had damaged, which of course cost millions. My family and I moved far away from that place and all the way to another continent as initially suggested by my husband. I am even more grateful for the well-being and safety of my children. I do not know what that thing is, and I do not care to know. I am still scared of animals to this day and could never step into a zoo, a forest or a park since. Every time an animal looks at me, I freeze completely. I do not know why those government guys want to keep things secret, or even if that thing is still snatching kids, but I will never say this enough. Please be careful. Some strange beings live among us, and sometimes, things are not as they seem.